Hey, welcome back. Before you toss another dime in the jar, let's take a closer look at one that's been quietly turning heads among collectors. First coin. The story of the 1967 Roosevelt dime begins not with a mint mark, but with the deliberate absence of one, and that absence is the very detail that draws collectors back to this coin again and again, wondering what they might be holding. Before revealing what verified, professionally graded examples of this coin have actually brought at auction, and before explaining the specific factors that separate an ordinary pocket change dime from a genuinely valuable specimen, it's worth understanding why an entire generation of American dimes rolled off the presses without any indication of where they were struck at all. That mystery alone has fueled decades of curiosity, kitchen table research, and hopeful trips to coin shops. And by the end of this documentary, you'll understand exactly what separates a coin worth a few cents from one that has commanded thousands of dollars in the collector marketplace. To understand the 1967 dime, you have to go back 2 years earlier to 1965, when the United States found itself in the grip of a genuine coinage crisis. Silver prices were climbing toward the point where the metal value of a silver dime or quarter threatened to exceed its face value, and everyday Americans, sensing this, began pulling silver coins out of circulation and hoarding them at an alarming rate. Congress responded with the Coinage Act of 1965, which eliminated silver from dimes and quarters entirely, replacing the traditional 90% silver composition with a copper-nickel-clad sandwich designed to look similar while costing the Treasury far less to produce. As part of that same emergency legislation, mint marks were suspended altogether from 1965 through 1967, a move intended to discourage speculators and collectors from hoarding coins by date and mint location, during a period when the mint was struggling to keep enough coinage in circulation to support everyday commerce. This means that every single dime struck in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco during those 3 years, including every 1967 dime in existence, left the mint with no letter identifying its birthplace, a uniform absence rather than an unusual anomaly. The Roosevelt dime itself carries a legacy that predates this Cladera experiment by nearly 2 decades. It was introduced in 1946, the year after President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's death, as a tribute to his tireless advocacy for the March of Dimes and the fight against polio, a disease that had personally afflicted him, and that the organization worked relentlessly to eradicate through public donations collected, fittingly, in dimes. The design came from the hand of John R. Sinek, the chief engraver of the United States Mint at the time, who placed Roosevelt's dignified profile on the obverse facing left, accompanied by the word Liberty arching above and the date resting below, with his own small initials JS positioned discreetly at the base of the neck truncation. The reverse carries a design rich with symbolism, featuring a lit torch at the center representing liberty, flanked on the left by an olive branch symbolizing peace, and on the right by an oak branch representing strength and independence, all encircled by the words United States of America and EPLUIBUS UNUM. By 1967, this design was already familiar to millions of Americans, but the coin itself had quietly transformed beneath the surface, no longer the silver piece their parents had known. Physically, the 1967 dime measures 17.9 millimeters in diameter and weighs 2.27 grams, a fraction lighter than its silver predecessors, with a reeded edge featuring 118 fine ridges that once served the practical purpose of discouraging the shaving of precious metal from a coin's rim, even though that function became largely symbolic once silver left the composition. Its clad structure consists of 2 outer layers made of 75% copper and 25% nickel, metallurgically bonded to a pure copper core that reveals itself as a distinctive reddish stripe when you examine the edge closely. This composition gave the coin a similar silvery appearance to its predecessor while dramatically reducing its intrinsic metal value, a compromise that kept dimes flowing through cash registers, vending machines, and parking meters across the country. Mintage figures for 1967 were enormous, with well over 2 billion dimes struck across the year to satisfy an economy still recovering from the coin shortage, which means that in terms of sheer survival, this is not a scarce date by any conventional measure, and the overwhelming majority of surviving examples remain worth only face value in worn, circulated condition. So where does genuine value enter the picture for a coin produced in such staggering quantities? The answer lies almost entirely in exceptional preservation, distinctive strike characteristics, and the rare presence of manufacturing errors that slipped past quality control at the mint. Because 1967 fell within the window when the United States Mint issued special mint sets rather than traditional proof sets, a special category of 1967 dimes exists that was struck with extra care, sometimes on specially prepared planchets and dies, resulting in sharper detail and, in exceptional cases, a semi-reflective or cameo-like finish that stands apart dramatically from an ordinary circulation strike. Collectors pursuing top-tier examples also chase what's known as the full bands designation, referring to the two horizontal bands wrapped around the torch on the reverse. When these bands show complete, unbroken separation without the usual die wear or weak strike blending them together, the coin becomes significantly more desirable to specialists building high-grade type sets. A well-preserved 1967 dime graded MS-67 or higher by a major grading service, particularly one carrying a full bands designation, can realistically command a price in the range of $1,200 to $2,000, depending on the specific grade, eye appeal, and how many comparable examples the grading population reports have on file. Beyond condition rarity, the truly extraordinary values in this series come from documented mint errors, and this is where the story becomes genuinely fascinating for both new and experienced collectors. Because the transition away from silver happened so abruptly, a small number of leftover silver planchets from earlier production runs occasionally found their way into the presses during the clad era, resulting in transitional era coins struck on the wrong metal stock entirely. A 1967 dime authenticated as having been struck on a silver planchet is an entirely different animal from a standard clad example, since it represents a genuine manufacturing anomaly rather than simple condition rarity. And verified specimens of this type have sold at auction for figures well beyond $2,500, occasionally climbing past $3,500 when the example also displays strong strike quality and clean surfaces. Other sought-after anomalies include double die varieties, where a misaligned hub created doubling visible in the lettering or Roosevelt's profile, as well as off-center strikes and coins struck on clipped or oddly shaped planchets, each of which appeals to a dedicated niche of era collectors who value the story of how the mistake occurred as much as the physical rarity itself. For anyone hoping to evaluate a 1967 dime sitting in a jar or an inherited collection, professional grading and authentication are not optional steps, but essential ones, because the difference between a coin worth a handful of cents and one worth thousands often comes down to details invisible to the untrained eye. Reputable third-party grading services examine strike sharpness, surface preservation, luster, and the presence or absence of contact marks under controlled lighting and magnification, then encapsulate the coin with a tamper-evident holder and an official grade that the market recognizes and trusts. Collectors should be wary of sellers claiming extraordinary value for a coin based solely on its date or the absence of a mint mark, since, as established earlier, every 1967 dime lacks that mark by design rather than by rarity, and misunderstanding this fact has led many casual sellers to overstate what an ordinary example is worth. Counterfeit awareness also matters here, particularly for the silver planchet era coins, since their premium value makes them an occasional target for altered or artificially toned fakes, which is precisely why documentation from an established grading authority carries so much weight in any serious transaction. Preserving a 1967 dime properly, whether it turns out to be a common circulated piece or a genuinely exceptional specimen, starts with handling it only by the edges to avoid transferring oils from your fingertips onto the surface, since copper-nickel-clad coins are particularly prone to spotting and tunning when exposed to skin contact or humid air over time. Long-term storage in inert PVC-free holders, whether individual flips, capsules, or archival albums, protects surfaces from the chemical degradation that plagues coins kept in old cardboard folders or cheap plastic sleeves for decades. Auction records for this series continue to demonstrate that the market rewards documented rarity and pristine condition far more than age or date alone. And as grading populations for exceptional 1967 dimes remain thin at the very top of the condition census, collector demand for verified full bands and era examples shows no sign of slowing. Whether a particular coin in your possession turns out to be one of the many ordinary survivors or something genuinely exceptional can only be determined through careful examination and professional authentication. But understanding the history, the composition, and the specific factors collectors prize gives you the foundation to look at that small copper-nickel disc with an entirely new appreciation. Next coin. The year 1990 arrived quietly for American coinage, with no anniversary to celebrate and no design change to announce. Yet a small copper-nickel dime struck that year at the Denver Mint has since found its way into the hands of serious collectors who prize it for reasons that have nothing to do with fanfare. What makes this particular coin worth investigating isn't some hidden secret stamped into its surface, but rather a combination of production quality, survival rate, and grading distinction that most people who handle spare change would never think to look for. Later in this documentary, you'll learn exactly what separates an ordinary 1990 dime worth a few cents from an exceptional certified example that has drawn real competition among collectors, along with the specific factors that determine where any given coin falls on that spectrum. To understand why a dime from 1990 matters at all, it helps to place it within the broader arc of American coinage history following the upheaval of the mid-1960s. By the time 1990 rolled around, the United States had been producing copper-nickel-clad dimes for a full quarter century, the silver composition long since abandoned in the wake of the 1965 Coinage Act, and the Roosevelt dime had settled into its role as one of the most heavily produced denominations in American commerce. The country in 1990 was navigating the final year of the Cold War's long twilight, watching the Berlin Wall's aftermath reshape Europe, while at home, the economy moved through a period of gradual slowdown that would tip into recession by the following year. Coinage production continued at an industrial pace regardless of these broader currents, because dimes remained essential to vending machines, parking meters, and the everyday cash transactions that defined pre-digital American commerce, and the Denver Mint operated as one of two primary workhorse facilities alongside Philadelphia, striking coins in volumes most people never pause to consider. The Roosevelt dime's design had already been fixed for over 4 decades by 1990, a legacy from sculptor and engraver John R. Sinek, who created the coin in 1946 as a national tribute to Franklin Delano Roosevelt following his death the previous year. Roosevelt's connection to the dime ran deeper than simple memorial honor, since he had spent much of his presidency championing the fight against polio through the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, an organization whose fundraising campaign became famously known as the March of Dimes precisely because Americans were asked to mail in that small coin by the millions. Sinek's obverse portrait shows Roosevelt in left-facing profile, dignified and composed, with liberty arched above his head and in God we trust placed just behind his neck, while his own initials, JS, sit discreetly at the base of the bust truncation. The reverse carries a design rich with post-war symbolism, a centered torch representing liberty and enlightenment, flanked by an olive branch for peace on one side and an oak branch for strength on the other, encircled by United States of America above and EPLUBUSUNUM below. a composition that had remained essentially untouched since its debut and would continue unchanged for years after 1990 as well. Turning to the coin's physical specifications, the 1990 D-dime measures 17.9 millimeters across and weighs 2.27 grams, consistent with every clad dime produced since 1965, with a reeded edge of 118 ridges that today serves a largely traditional rather than anti-counterfeiting purpose, given the coin's non-precious metal composition. Its structure consists of outer layers made from a 75% copper, 25% nickel alloy bonded around a solid copper core, a construction you can often spot along the coin's edge as a thin reddish line separating the outer cladding from the inner layer. The Denver Mint identified its production with a small D mint mark positioned to the left of the torch on the reverse, a detail that, unlike the mint mark-free issues of the mid-1960s, was standard practice by 1990 and simply indicates the coin's place of origin rather than any unusual rarity in itself. Mintage for the 1990 D-dime ran into the hundreds of millions, reflecting the sheer scale of coin production needed to keep American commerce running smoothly, which means that in raw survival terms, this date is anything but scarce, and the vast majority of examples that circulated through cash registers and pockets show the wear you'd expect from ordinary use. Given mintage numbers of that magnitude, the natural question becomes why any 1990 D-dime would attract serious collector attention at all, and the answer rests almost entirely on the difficulty of finding examples that survived in exceptional, untouched condition. Coins struck for general circulation were handled roughly from the moment they left the mint, jostled in bags, counted by machines, and passed through countless hands, all of which leaves marks, scuffs, and a gradual dulling of the original mint luster. A 1990 D-dime that somehow avoided this wear, retaining sharp strike detail and vibrant original luster, becomes a genuine outlier within a mintage of that size. And it's this scarcity of high-grade survivors, not the coin's date or mint mark alone, that drives its value. Professional grading services evaluate these survivors using the mint state scale running from MS60 up through MS70, examining strike sharpness, the presence or absence of contact marks, overall luster and eye appeal. And for the Roosevelt series, collectors also look closely at the full band's designation on the reverse torch, where the two horizontal bands must show complete separation without the flatness that a weak strike or die wear typically produces. When a 1990 D-dime achieves a top-tier grade, such as MS67 or higher, with the full band's designation intact, it moves into a different collecting category entirely, one where population reports from major grading services show only a limited number of coins reaching that pinnacle out of the hundreds of millions originally struck. Certified examples at this level have realistically traded in the range of roughly $1,300 to $2,200, with the exact figure depending heavily on how the coin compares against others at the very top of the certified population, since even a fractional difference in strike sharpness or surface preservation can separate one price tier from the next. It's worth being direct here that these figures apply specifically to coins independently certified by a recognized grading service, not to the average 1990 D-dime found in loose change or an old coin jar, because the overwhelming majority of surviving examples remain worth only face value or a small premium at most. Collectors pursuing these condition rarity pieces are typically building registry sets or chasing the recognition that comes with owning a coin at the top of a graded population. And that competitive pursuit is precisely what sustains demand for coins that, on paper, might seem too common to matter. Beyond condition rarity, attentive collectors also watch for die varieties and minor production anomalies within any given date and mint combination, though it's important to be honest that no widely documented, significant error variety has been established as a defining feature specifically tied to the 1990 D-dime, the way certain other dates in the series carry recognized doubled dies or transitional errors. This doesn't diminish the coin's collectability so much as it reframes where the real value lies, squarely within condition and strike quality rather than dramatic manufacturing mistakes. Authentication remains essential regardless of which category a coin falls into, and this is where third-party grading services play their most important role, encapsulating a coin after careful examination under magnification and assigning a grade the market recognizes as trustworthy, which protects both buyer and seller from the ambiguity of subjective condition assessments made outside a controlled setting. Counterfeit awareness matters here too, since coins commanding four-figure premiums naturally attract occasional attempts at deception, whether through artificially enhanced surfaces or misrepresented grading, making purchase from reputable dealers and verification of certification numbers through the grading service's own database a wise habit for any serious buyer. Caring for a 1990D dime properly starts with the same fundamentals that apply across the entire clad series, handling by the edges only to avoid depositing skin oils that accelerate tunning and spotting on copper-nickel surfaces, and storing coins in archival quality, PVC-free holders rather than the cardboard flip books or cheap vinyl sleeves that were common decades ago and are now known to chemically degrade coin surfaces over time. For anyone holding a 1990D dime and wondering whether it might be something special, the honest answer is that visual inspection alone rarely tells the full story, since the difference between a coin worth face value and one commanding a genuine four-figure price often comes down to microscopic details in strike and surface preservation that only trained graders working under magnification can properly assess. What remains true across the entire Roosevelt series, and certainly for this Denver-struck 1990 issue, is that collector demand consistently rewards documented, certified rarity over raw age or mintage figures, and as long as grading populations at the very top remain thin, that competitive demand shows every sign of continuing into the years ahead. Last coin. Pick up a 1999 Roosevelt dime bearing the small D mint mark, and at first glance, you're holding one of the most unremarkable coins in American pocket change, yet experienced collectors examining this same piece under a loupe sometimes pause, turn it slowly under the light, and look for something most people would walk right past. There's nothing dramatic printed on its surface to explain that reaction, no bold anniversary date or design change to draw the eye, which is exactly what makes the story worth investigating rather than simply telling. Before we get to what certain certified examples of this coin have actually achieved among serious collectors, and before explaining what separates a forgettable dime from one that draws genuine competition at auction, it helps to understand what you're actually looking at when you hold a coin from the very last year of the 20th century. The year 1999 sat at a strange crossroads in American life, with the country consumed by anticipation and mild anxiety over the Y2K computer bug, an economy riding the tail end of a long 1990s expansion, and a sense that the millennium's turn would mark some kind of tangible before and after. Coin production continued through all of it with the same industrial rhythm it always had, because dimes remained essential to a cash-based economy that still relied heavily on vending machines, toll booths, and everyday retail transactions. The Denver Mint, one of the country's primary production facilities alongside Philadelphia, struck dimes that year in volumes reaching into the hundreds of millions, a scale of output that makes the coin's raw survival anything but scarce. And it's worth sitting with that fact for a moment, because it fundamentally shapes everything a collector needs to understand about where genuine value in this coin actually comes from. To understand the design you're holding, you have to go back more than 50 years before 1999 to 1946, when sculptor and engraver John R. Sinek created the Roosevelt dime as a tribute to Franklin Delano Roosevelt following his death the previous year. Roosevelt's personal history with the dime denomination ran deeper than simple memorial honor, since he had championed the fight against polio for decades through the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, whose fundraising campaign became known nationwide as the March of Dimes precisely because ordinary Americans were asked to mail in that small coin by the millions to fund research and treatment. Cynic's obverse shows Roosevelt in dignified left-facing profile, liberty arched above his head, in God we trust tucked behind his neck, and his own small initials, JS, resting at the base of the bust, a design so enduring that by 1999 it had remained essentially unchanged through more than 5 decades of American coinage. The reverse carries its own quiet symbolism, a centered torch representing liberty flanked by an olive branch for peace and an oak branch for strength, encircled by United States of America and EPLUBUSUNUM. And understanding this artwork matters because experienced collectors examining any Roosevelt dime start by checking how sharply these design elements were rendered in the original strike. I'll look closely at the coin's physical makeup, because this is where an experienced eye begins its real work. The 1999 D-dime measures 17.9 millimeters in diameter and weighs 2.27 grams, consistent with every clad dime struck since the composition changed in 1965, built from outer layers of 75% copper and 25% nickel, bonded around a solid copper core that reveals itself as a thin reddish line along the edge. That edge itself carries 118 reeded ridges, a holdover from the days when such ridges deterred the shaving of precious metal, though by 1999 the feature served tradition more than function given the coin's non-precious composition. The small D mint mark sits to the left of the torch on the reverse, confirming Denver as the coin's origin, and while this placement is standard and unremarkable in itself, it's precisely the kind of detail a careful collector checks first, alongside the date, before moving on to the far more consequential question of condition. This is where the investigation truly begins, because with mintage numbers in the hundreds of millions, date and mint mark alone tell you almost nothing about whether a particular 1999 D-dime is worth anything beyond face value. What separates an ordinary survivor from an exceptional one is almost entirely a matter of how the coin was struck and how it survived the decades since. Coins destined for circulation were bagged, counted, and handled roughly from the moment they left the mint, accumulating the small scuffs, contact marks, and dulled luster that come from jostling against thousands of other coins, and the overwhelming majority of 1999 D-dimes still in existence show exactly this kind of wear. An experienced collector examining a candidate coin looks first at overall eye appeal, then narrows in on strike quality, checking whether the fine details in Roosevelt's hair and the torch's flame came through crisply or emerged soft and mushy from a worn die. They'll examine the surface for original mint luster, that particular cartwheel shine clad coins display when untouched by circulation, and they'll check color and toning, since natural, even coloration is generally viewed more favorably than blotchy or artificially induced tone. Beyond general strike quality, collectors pursuing the Roosevelt series pay particularly close attention to the reverse torch, where 2 horizontal bands wrap around the shaft. When these bands appear fully separated and sharply defined without the flatness that die wear or a weak strike typically produces, the coin earns what's known as a full bands designation, a distinction that matters enormously to specialists building high-grade type sets or registry collections. Professional grading services assess all of this under controlled lighting and magnification, assigning a numerical grade on the mint state scale from MS-60 through the rarely awarded MS-70, and it's only when a 1999 D-dime achieves a grade at the very top of that scale, ideally MS-67 or higher with full bands intact, that it moves into serious collector territory. Certified examples reaching that level have realistically traded in the range of roughly $1,100 to $2,400, with the specific figure shaped by exactly how that coin compares against the small number of others certified at the same tier, since population reports for this date at the highest grades remain genuinely thin relative to the enormous original mintage. It's worth pausing here to be direct about something collectors sometimes wish casual sellers understood better. These value ranges apply specifically to coins that have been independently authenticated and graded by a recognized third-party service, not to an average 1999 D dime pulled from a coin jar or found in circulated pocket change, which remains worth essentially face value. Regarding mint errors and die varieties specific to this date, it's important to be honest rather than speculative. No widely documented or significant error variety has been firmly established as a defining feature of the 1999 D dime, in the way certain other dates in the Roosevelt series carry recognized double dies or transitional planchet errors. And any claim suggesting otherwise should be treated with caution until verified by a reputable grading service or established numismatic reference. This doesn't diminish the coin's collectability so much as it clarifies where the real competition lies, in condition rarity and strike quality rather than dramatic manufacturing anomalies, and authentication remains essential either way. Since coins commanding four-figure premiums inevitably attract occasional counterfeits or misrepresented grading claims that only certification through a reputable service can reliably rule out. For anyone holding a 1999 D dime and wondering what to do next, proper handling starts with touching the coin only by its edges, since skin oils accelerate spotting and tunning on copper-nickel surfaces in ways that can permanently diminish a coin's eye appeal. Long-term storage belongs in archival quality, PVC-free holders rather than the cardboard flip books or vinyl sleeves once common in casual collections, materials now understood to chemically interact with coin surfaces over years of storage. The honest reality, and this is worth sitting with rather than glossing over, is that visual inspection alone rarely settles the question of whether a given coin is genuinely exceptional, since the difference between face value and a legitimate four-figure certified example often comes down to microscopic details in strike sharpness and surface preservation that only trained graders working under magnification can properly evaluate. What remains consistently true across the Roosevelt series, and certainly for this final year of the Century Denver issue, is that collector demand rewards documented, certified rarity far more than raw age or the story printed on a coin's face, and that competitive pursuit among specialists shows no sign of slowing as thin high-grade populations become harder to source with each passing year.